The vast, shimmering expanse of the South China Sea has long been a canvas for geopolitical maneuvering. But in recent months, it has become something far more dangerous, a tinderbox. The latest flashpoint, which has captured the world's attention and ratcheted up tensions to a fever pitch, involves the Philippines. In early August 2025, a seemingly routine resupply mission to a remote Philippine outpost, the BRP Sierra Madre at 2nd Thomas Shoal, turned into a high-stakes confrontation. Chinese Coast Guard vessels, larger and more imposing, aggressively moved to block the smaller Filipino boats. What followed was a tense ballet of near collisions, the blasting of powerful water cannons, and even the brandishing of spears by Chinese personnel, a shockingly primitive escalation in a 21st-century dispute. This was not an isolated incident but the culmination of a pattern of increasing Chinese assertiveness. For years, Beijing has used its so-called cabbage strategy, swarming disputed areas with a dizzying array of maritime militia, Coast Guard and naval ships, to slowly squeeze other claimants out. But the events of August 2025 marked a qualitative shift. The use of ramming tactics and the open threat of force against Filipino sailors represented a dangerous new precedent. The world watched, holding its breath, as Manila released damning video evidence of the encounter, condemning Beijing's barbaric and inhumane actions. The incident served as a stark reminder that these contested waters are no longer just about fishing rights or territorial claims. They are now the front line of a great power struggle. The response from Washington was swift and unequivocal. The United States, bound by its 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines, reaffirmed its commitment in the strongest possible terms. A statement from the State Department made it clear that an armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including those of its Coast Guard in the South China Sea, would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments. This declaration drew a firm red line, directly challenging Beijing's actions and placing American military might squarely behind its treaty ally. Suddenly, a regional maritime dispute carried the terrifying weight of a potential superpower conflict, transforming the South China Sea into the most dangerous theater in the world. The tension was further inflamed by rhetoric over Taiwan. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. noted that a conflict over the island would inevitably draw his country in, given its geographic proximity and the hundreds of thousands of Filipino citizens living there. This statement, logical from a Filipino perspective, was met with a furious rebuke from Beijing. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a blunt warning, telling the Philippines not to play with fire. This convergence of crises, an active standoff in the South China Sea and a simmering diplomatic war over Taiwan, has set the stage for a confrontation that no one wants, but that now seems frighteningly plausible. The front lines are no longer hypothetical. They are being drawn in real time by ships at sea. In the face of rising pressure from Beijing, a new and powerful dynamic is reshaping the Indo-Pacific: the rapid solidification of alliances. Countries that once walked a fine line, balancing economic ties with China against security concerns, are now being forced to choose sides. The Philippines, under President Marcos Jr., has pivoted decisively back towards its traditional alliance with the United States. This isn't just about rhetoric, it involves concrete military actions. Manila has expanded American access to its military bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, granting U.S. forces strategic locations that look out onto the South China Sea and the Luzon Strait, a critical waterway separating the Philippines from Taiwan. These bases are not merely symbolic, they are staging grounds that would be vital in any regional conflict. This renewed U.S.-Philippine partnership is the cornerstone of a broader American-led strategy to build what some call a latticework of alliances to counter China. The goal is to create a network of like-minded nations that can act in concert to uphold a rules-based international order. This includes strengthening the Quad, United States, Japan, Australia, and India, and fostering new trilateral agreements, such as the one between the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines. These groupings are moving beyond diplomatic talking points and into the realm of tangible security cooperation, conducting joint military exercises, sharing intelligence, and coordinating their strategic postures with a frequency and intensity never seen before. The logic behind this strategy is one of integrated deterrence. The idea is that a web of interlocking alliances presents a more formidable and resilient challenge to a potential aggressor than a single superpower acting alone. If Beijing contemplates action against one country, it must now calculate the potential reaction of many. We are seeing this play out in real time. Japanese destroyers are participating in joint drills with American and Filipino vessels in the South China Sea. Australian surveillance aircraft are conducting freedom of navigation patrols. Each action on its own is a measured response. Together, they send a powerful, unified message that the region is not China's to dominate. Of course, this alliance building is seen from Beijing as a provocative act of encirclement. Chinese state media routinely decries it as an Asian NATO and a relic of Cold War thinking designed to contain China's rightful rise. This perception gap is itself a source of immense danger. While Washington and its allies see their actions as defensive and necessary to preserve stability, Beijing sees them as offensive and aimed at thwarting its national ambitions. This fundamental disagreement over intent means that every new military drill, every new defense pact, and every new base agreement pushes the two sides further apart, hardening their respective positions and making a diplomatic off-ramp ever more difficult to find. Perhaps the most significant development in this new strategic landscape is the increasingly assertive role of India. For decades, New Delhi practiced a policy of strategic autonomy, carefully avoiding formal alliances and seeking to maintain good relations with all major powers. However, a brutal border clash with China in the Himalayas in 2020, combined with Beijing's growing naval presence in the Indian Ocean, has prompted a profound strategic reassessment. India now sees its security interests as deeply intertwined with the stability of the wider Indo-Pacific. This has led it to shed its traditional reticence and step onto the stage as a major player in the anti-China coalition, even if it shuns the term alliance. A clear sign of this shift was the landmark state visit of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to New Delhi in August 2025. The visit was far more than a diplomatic courtesy. It resulted in the signing of comprehensive new defense agreements that cover cooperation between the two countries' armies, navies, and air forces. This builds on a previous deal in which the Philippines purchased India's BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles, a potent weapon system designed to deter naval aggression. The message was unmistakable. India is now willing to arm and train countries that are on the front lines of disputes with China, extending its influence from the Indian Ocean deep into the Pacific. Even more striking has been India's new willingness to project its naval power directly into the South China Sea. In a move that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, Indian warships have recently begun conducting joint patrols with the Philippine Navy in waters that Beijing claims as its own. This is a direct challenge to China's 9-dash line and a powerful demonstration of India's commitment to freedom of navigation. By sailing its warships thousands of miles from its own shores to operate alongside a U.S. ally, India is signaling that it is no longer just a South Asian power, but an Indo-Pacific one, with interests and capabilities that span the entire region. This Indian pivot adds a formidable new dimension to the strategic competition. China must now contend with a second, massive and nuclear-armed neighbor that is actively working to counterbalance its influence. This complicates Beijing's military planning, forcing it to look not just east towards the Pacific, but also south and west towards India. For the United States and its allies, India's emergence is a welcome development, adding immense strategic depth and demographic weight to their coalition. The great game of the 21st century now has a powerful new player, and its entry has fundamentally changed the board for everyone involved. Even as warships patrol contested seas, another, equally consequential war is being waged on the economic front. The trade relationship that once served as the bedrock of US-China relations, creating decades of prosperity, has now been weaponized. The Trump administration has unleashed a new wave of sweeping tariffs, transforming global commerce into a battlefield where economic pain is inflicted to achieve geopolitical goals. The logic is simple and brutal. By choking off access to the lucrative American market, Washington aims to punish China and its partners, forcing them to alter their strategic behavior, particularly their ongoing economic support for Russia. This has ignited a global trade war with unpredictable and far-reaching consequences. The central front of this war is the direct confrontation with China. On August 12, 2025, deadline looms for the extension of a tariff pause, and the administration is threatening to impose even higher duties on Chinese goods. The stated justification is Beijing's continued purchases of Russian oil, which Washington views as fueling Moscow's war machine. China has fired back, defending its trade with Russia as legitimate and lawful and accusing the US of protectionist bullying. This standoff over energy trade has become a proxy for the larger strategic rivalry, with each side using economic levers to pressure the other. The tariffs are no longer just about trade imbalances, they are instruments of statecraft, wielded like sanctions. But the economic shrapnel is not confined to China. In a move that has shocked and angered allies, the United States has also imposed a staggering 50% tariff on India for the same reason: its purchases of Russian crude. This has put New Delhi in an incredibly difficult position, caught between its need for affordable energy and its desire for a strong strategic partnership with Washington. The immediate effect was a pause in Russian oil purchases by Indian state refiners, showing the immense power of US secondary sanctions. However, it has also created deep resentment in India, where leaders have publicly pushed back against what they see as an infringement on their sovereignty. This aggressive use of tariffs extends across the globe, hitting even close partners. Switzerland faces a 39% tariff, crippling its vital gold refining industry. Canada and Brazil have been hit with tariffs of 35% and 50% respectively, rattling their economies despite some exemptions. New trade deals with South Korea and the European Union have institutionalized 15% tariffs. The message is clear. In this new era of geoeconomic competition, there are no permanent friends, only interests. The globalized system of free trade, which the US itself built, is being systematically dismantled in favor of a more fragmented and confrontational world organized around competing economic blocs. The shockwaves from this escalating trade war are reverberating through every sector of the global economy, disrupting supply chains and forcing a painful realignment of international business. The technology sector, the engine of modern innovation, finds itself at the epicenter of the conflict. The Trump administration's planned 100% tariff on imported semiconductors is a particularly blunt instrument, designed to cripple China's tech ambitions and compel companies to onshore their manufacturing. This has sent a panic through an industry built on complex cross-border supply chains, where a single microchip can travel the world before being installed in a final product. In response, corporations are scrambling to navigate the new political realities. We're seeing a massive, politically driven reallocation of capital. Apple's CEO Tim Cook, in a move to secure exemptions from the punishing tariffs, has pledged an additional $100 billion in U.S. manufacturing investment, bringing the company's total commitment to an astonishing $600 billion. Similarly, the Taiwanese semiconductor giant TSMC is accelerating the construction of its fabrication plants in Arizona to shield itself from the tariffs. This is reshoring on a grand scale, but it comes at a cost: higher prices for consumers, reduced efficiency, and the potential for a so-called tech curtain to descend, splitting the world into two incompatible technological ecosystems. The automotive industry is another major casualty. Toyota, the Japanese auto giant, has warned that the new U.S. car tariffs will slash its profit forecast by a staggering $9.5 billion. This is a direct hit to a key U.S. ally and highlights the indiscriminate nature of the tariff regime. The tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other components ripple through the manufacturing process, making cars more expensive to produce and purchase. This not only hurts foreign automakers, but also threatens American jobs at foreign-owned plants across the country, and raises costs for American consumers, who ultimately bear the brunt of these trade disputes. The diplomatic fallout is becoming as severe as the economic damage. Traditional allies are no longer standing idly by. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum are coordinating a joint response to mitigate the damage to the North American trade bloc. In a bizarre twist that really illustrates the desperation, Swiss political figures are reportedly lobbying Gianni Infantino, the head of FIFA, to use his influence with the Trump administration to get the tariffs on their country reversed. This chaotic, ad hoc diplomacy is a poor substitute for the stable, rules-based system it is replacing, and it underscores the profound instability that has been unleashed upon the global economy. Beneath the surface of the naval standoffs and trade wars lies a deeper, more existential fear: the growing risk of nuclear conflict. The world has quietly entered a new and far more perilous nuclear age. The relative stability of the Cold War, which was based on a bipolar balance of terror between the United States and the Soviet Union, has given way to a more complex and volatile multipolar system. The primary driver of this new danger is the rapid and opaque expansion of China's nuclear arsenal, coupled with rising tensions between Beijing, Washington, and Moscow. The old certainties of deterrence are eroding, replaced by a frightening ambiguity. Publicly, the world's nuclear powers continue to pay lip service to the famous Reagan-Gorbachev dictum that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. As recently as 2022, the leaders of the P5 nations, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, reaffirmed this principle, stating their arsenals were for defensive purposes only. However, a chilling divergence has emerged between these public declarations and the reality of their military doctrines and preparations. Strategic planners in all three major powers are increasingly gaming out scenarios for limited or tactical nuclear war, a concept that was once considered unthinkable. This shift in thinking dramatically lowers the threshold for nuclear use. The flashpoints for such a catastrophe are clear. A conflict over Taiwan is perhaps the most dangerous scenario. If China were to invade the island, and the United States were to intervene, a conventional war between two nuclear-armed powers could quickly escalate. If one side found itself losing on the conventional battlefield, the temptation to use a low-yield tactical nuclear weapon to stave off defeat could become overwhelming. The South China Sea presents another terrifying path to escalation. A naval clash that results in the sinking of a major warship could trigger a cycle of retaliation that spirals out of control, crossing the nuclear threshold through miscalculation or desperation. What makes this new era so unstable is the breakdown of communication and the absence of the arms control treaties that helped manage the Cold War. The guardrails are gone. China has long resisted calls for transparency regarding the size and doctrine of its nuclear forces, making it difficult for United States military planners to gauge its intentions. This lack of clarity breeds suspicion and fuels worst-case scenario planning on both sides. In this climate of intense distrust, a simple accident or a regional crisis could be misinterpreted, leading to a chain reaction with consequences that are too horrific to contemplate. The shadow of the bomb, which had receded after 1991, once again looms large over the world. To understand the gravity of the current moment, it is useful to look to the past. The dynamic unfolding between the United States and China today bears an uncanny resemblance to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. We are witnessing the division of the world into two competing ideological and strategic blocs. On one side is a United States-led coalition of democracies, championing a rules-based international order, human rights, and free markets. On the other is an emerging axis led by China and including Russia, that promotes an alternative vision of state-centric authoritarianism, where national sovereignty trumps individual rights and economic control is a tool of state power. Like the first Cold War, this new competition is global in scope, playing out in proxy conflicts across the world. The battle for influence is being waged not just in the Indo-Pacific, but also in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. China's Belt and Road Initiative, a massive global infrastructure project, is a key tool in this contest, creating economic dependencies and building political goodwill. The United States and its allies are now scrambling to offer a credible alternative, promoting their own investment and development programs. This competition extends to every domain, from telecommunications infrastructure and technology standards to diplomatic influence in international organizations like the United Nations. However, there are also crucial differences from the original Cold War that make this new rivalry potentially more complex and dangerous. The most significant difference is the degree of economic interdependence. The United States and the Soviet Union had almost entirely separate economic systems. Today, the economies of the United States and China are deeply intertwined, a legacy of decades of globalization. This creates a strange paradox. Even as they engage in a fierce strategic rivalry, the two powers remain major trading partners. This economic entanglement acts as both a potential brake on conflict and a powerful weapon, as the ongoing trade war demonstrates. Untangling these economies is a messy and painful process. Another key difference is the nature of the ideological contest. The Cold War was a stark clash between communism and capitalism. Today's competition is more nuanced. China does not seek to export its political system in the same way the Soviet Union exported communism. Instead, it offers a model of successful authoritarian capitalism that is appealing to many developing nations. It promotes its system as a more efficient path to development, free from the messy political debates of democracy. This makes the ideological struggle less about conversion and more about creating a world that is safe for autocracy, directly challenging the liberal international order the United States has championed since World War II. While presidents and generals map out strategy, the real-world consequences of this escalating conflict are felt most acutely by ordinary people caught in the crossfire. In the Philippines, the constant tension in the South China Sea has a direct impact on the lives and livelihoods of coastal communities. Filipino fishermen, who have plied these waters for generations, now face harassment and intimidation from the Chinese maritime militia. They are often chased away from their traditional fishing grounds, their catches confiscated and their boats damaged. For them, the abstract notion of geopolitical competition translates into the concrete reality of a smaller catch and a struggle to feed their families. The fear is not just economic, it is becoming visceral. In the western Philippine province of Palawan, residents were recently alarmed when debris from a Chinese rocket launch fell near their shores, creating a hazard for local shipping and aircraft. This incident, condemned by the Philippine government, brought the space and military dimensions of the rivalry crashing down to earth. For people living on the literal front lines, the threat of conflict is not a distant news headline but a clear and present danger. They live with the anxiety that a miscalculation at sea or an accident in the sky could ignite a conflict that would engulf their homes. This human cost extends far beyond the immediate conflict zones. The global trade war, for instance, has a direct impact on American consumers and workers. Tariffs on imported goods, from cars to electronics, mean higher prices at the checkout counter, effectively acting as a tax on families. Workers in industries that rely on global supply chains, such as the auto sector, face the threat of layoffs as companies grapple with soaring costs and reduced profits. Similarly, American farmers who rely on exporting their crops to markets like China find themselves on the front lines of the economic battle, their livelihoods held hostage to the latest turn in trade negotiations. The psychological impact is also profound. The constant drumbeat of news about rising tensions, military drills, and the threat of war creates a pervasive sense of anxiety and uncertainty about the future. It erodes the optimism that defined the post-Cold War era and replaces it with a feeling of foreboding. Young people in particular are growing up in a world where great power conflict seems not just possible but perhaps even inevitable. This climate of fear can poison public discourse, fuel nationalism, and make it harder for leaders to find the political space needed for diplomacy and compromise. The first casualties of this conflict are trust, stability, and the simple peace of mind of ordinary citizens. The world now stands at a perilous fork in the road. The path we are currently on, marked by escalating military posturing, tit-for-tat economic warfare, and the steady erosion of diplomatic norms, leads toward a disastrous confrontation. A hot war between the United States and China, whether initiated by accident or design, would be a catastrophe on a scale not seen since 1945. The economic consequences would be devastating, triggering a global depression that would dwarf the 2008 financial crisis. The human cost would be immense, and the risk of nuclear escalation would hang over every decision. The front lines that are being set today could become the battlefields of tomorrow. To pull back from the brink, a concerted effort at de-escalation is urgently required. This must begin with the re-establishment of reliable channels of communication, particularly between the two militaries. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union maintained hotlines and regular dialogues to prevent miscalculation. Similar mechanisms are desperately needed today to manage incidents at sea and in the air and to ensure that a local confrontation does not spiral into a full-blown crisis. Restoring some semblance of stability requires both sides to agree on the basic rules of the road to avoid a catastrophic collision. Beyond crisis management, both Washington and Beijing must find a way to define areas of competition and potential cooperation. The relationship does not have to be a zero-sum game. There are global challenges such as climate change, pandemic prevention, and financial stability that neither power can solve alone. Carving out space for collaboration on these shared threats could help build a floor under the relationship, preventing it from collapsing entirely into open hostility. This would require immense political will and a recognition that some interests transcend the bilateral rivalry. It is a difficult task in the current climate of deep-seated distrust, but it is a necessary one. Ultimately, the future will be determined by the choices made in the coming months and years. Citizens and policymakers should watch for key indicators. Will the two sides agree to new arms control talks, particularly regarding nuclear weapons? Will the tariff wars cool down, or will they intensify? And most importantly, will leaders in Washington and Beijing find the wisdom and courage to manage their competition responsibly, or will they allow nationalist pressures and security dilemmas to drive them toward a conflict that would define the 21st century for all the wrong reasons? The world is watching, and the stakes could not be higher.